I'm going to call the meeting to order of the Planning Commission, May 16th meeting. Can we have the roll call, please?
Rodriguez?
Present.
Newton?
Here.
Green is absent. Kierline?
Here.
Fragoso?
Here.
Gonzalez-Parber?
Here.
I'm here too.
Chair Swift? The most important person in the room.
We have an approval of the agenda or any changes to the agenda?
I will move approval of the agenda. Not hearing any changes.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? I'm going to read the meeting protocol. The chair shall maintain order at the meetings in accordance with Robert's Rules of Order, and the commission has the responsibility to be a model of respectful behavior in order to encourage community participation and citizen input at commission meetings. The commission and the audience are expected to refrain from using profane language and/or ridiculing the character or motive of commission members, staff, or members of the public, and to maintain the standards of tolerance and civility. We're next going to have public comments on non-agenda items. Anyone wishing to address the commission on matters not on the agenda, but within the jurisdiction of the commission may do so now. Please state the matter on which you wish to speak. Matters not appearing on the commission's agenda will not receive action at this time, but may be referred to staff for a future meeting. Presentations will be limited to 3 minutes or as otherwise established by the commission chair. Persons are not required to give their name or address, but it's helpful for speakers to state their name for the record and whether or not they are a Fairfax resident in order that the secretary may identify them. So do we have anyone for public comments? We do.
Hello? Okay, good. I'm Rick Hamer. I'm of the residence formerly known as 50 Bolinas Road, but I'm still a Fairfax resident. I wish to remind the Planning Commission that Fairfax has 2 ordinances to protect residents who rent and call Fairfax home. I implore the Planning Commission to always question whether or not any project reduces affordable housing and thus residential population of Fairfax, to check a mental box that a project does not reduce housing, and if it tries to, demand that the owners redesign their project until our dwelling count in Fairfax is not reduced. The switcheroo may not be so obvious in the owner's version of their presentation. Quoting the applicability, specifically of Fairfax Town Ordinance 829, this definition applies to any dwelling space that is actually used for residential purposes, including live-work spaces, whether or not the residential use is legally permitted. One town code goes on to state an important qualification for a no-fault exception for ending a residency's tenancy. Quote, and I quote, "The landlord has already obtained permits to undertake substantial repairs to the dwelling unit that cannot be completed while the dwelling unit is occupied. To qualify, such a substantial repair must be for the primary purpose of making a dwelling habitable and to bring the dwelling unit into compliance," unquote. This is not turning a dwelling unit into another use such as an office or a restaurant, which is not doing anything but keeping the dwelling unit, whether or not it was legally permitted in the first place, anything but a dwelling unit. This is our town code and of record. Furthermore, Title 17.100 Central Commercial Zoning states under purpose, quote, "Second-story residential uses provide for both a nighttime population, which is commercially desirable, and living facilities for owners, workers, and those without automobiles," unquote. A notable local lyricist wrote, "They're having Fairfax for dessert." We Central Core residents would remain in Fairfax unless planning allows Central Fairfax to become nothing more than a playground for outsiders. And we residents need those in the Planning and Planning Commission to remember this and to speak up for us. And please make it clear our town's planning encourages products that add affordable dwelling space to the core of our community. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Chelsea. I am a mother hairstylist and local since 1976. I'm here tonight to speak from the heart, a message of love in the name of justice. As a proud, loving member of Fairfax family, I want to talk about choosing love, humanity, peace, and resolution over hate, greed, profit, or fear. Healthy, more conscious communities as a whole is the goal. Our business plan is secondary to this message. I love my town and all its creatures, our creatures. I understand the town and people of Fairfax have been working hard to rewrite our local cannabis ordinance, to create a competitive business environment for the cannabis movement to grow here in town, enabling new cannabis advocates to also have the opportunity to provide safe, effective services and education. Morinda is far behind in the education of cannabis medicine and its many benefits. Misinformation and lack of knowledge of this super plant is harming, not helping. There are groups that still believe in reefer madness theories and continue to spread propaganda in our town. We need to fix this level of ignorance through education. Fairfax has always been a progressive liberal town. We are the grassroots of Marin County. We cannot fall victim to fear or be bullied by organized hate and closed-mindedness. We cannot be manipulated by Nixon-era politics. It's 2019, we are Fairfax. Let's instead uphold the values, spirit, soul of our town. We can use our hearts, free minds, love, compassion, understanding, and respect for each other, resulting in freedom and justice for all. Fairfax is not Alabama. A rezoning of Fairfax and rewriting of the state and local codes and ordinances to reflect an anti-cannabis stance is not a good plan for Fairfax's growth. It is also counterproductive to the evolution of healthcare. Our town has always been pro-cannabis. Let's move onward and upward without being derailed by organized political interests of big business. The Coalition Connection launched a very well-funded anti-cannabis campaign that is intent on stopping cannabis movement from evolving in Marin. Well-organized, fear-based anti-cannabis lobbyists appear full force to town meetings across the county determined to stop cannabis businesses from opening, misinforming town officials and the public with misinformation. They use false data, they lie, use scare tactics. Grouping statistics together for everything on the DEA Schedule 1 list. This practice should not be tolerated, it's gross misinformation. Their top concern is potency of cannabis, of commercial cannabis. As a medical facility, we won't be handling recreational retail, and unlike illegally obtained products, we will be compliant with all testing and potency standards. Their next concern is about normalization is also unfounded. Unlike alcohol, dangerous pharmaceuticals, and other harmful illegal substances that are readily available to our communities, these are causing sickness and death. New research finds cannabis to be an excellent remedy to fix many of these problems. It's harm reduction, it's safe and excellent medicine that results in happier, healthier, more peaceful society. Government does not try to ban alcohol or prescription drugs because they are in the homes of parents. Alcohol and big pharma are in most homes. Family supervision is the responsibility of the parents, not the government. There is a level of hypocrisy that needs to be acknowledged here. Doctors prescribe harmful pharmaceuticals on a daily basis that result in worsened health and death. Cannabis does not have these harmful side effects or result in death. Only happier, healthier, more conscious communities as a whole. In 1944, the LaGuardia Committee report, which was conducted by our US government, clearly states cannabis was not found to be physically addictive, not a gateway drug, and did not lead to crime. The crimes only started when Prohibition began as a way to promote racism. Is underground racism still alive here in Fairfax? I hope not, but I can't find a member of this particular cannabis group that is not an affluent and white. As a youth, I personally experienced excessive trauma brought on by the cannabis prohibition in the 70s. We fled to Fairfax. It was safe here. I thought here in Fairfax by now we had overcome these racist stigmas that held underprivileged people prisoner. After the behaviors I have witnessed in regards to these politics, I'm appalled personally. Community terrorism and harassment is what I've witnessed, and backed by big money and pro-politics. I was very sad to hear a member get up and lie blatantly about being bothered by pot smoke while at Perry's for a concert. If you are from Fairfax, you know the longtime manager of Perry's hates weed. The claim was totally false. None of our business owners complain of pot smoke as a problem in town. The merchants do a great job of upholding ethics and looking out for each other. This group teaching their children organized hate tactics driven by outright lies is sad. Power and money is the goal of this group, whether its members understand the big picture or not. In addition, the state and local laws clearly state that cannabis cannot be consumed on or around cannabis dispensaries. This will not be a problem. The anti-cannabis campaign claims that cannabis dispensaries increase crime and robberies in the communities. We know this isn't true, and that's been operating for decades. Crime has not increased here. 2019 statistics show drunk driving fatalities decreased substantially since the legalization of cannabis. In addition, pharmaceutical-related deaths are decreasing, and illegal substance abuse stats are all down. And finally, the anti-cannabis campaign suggests that having a cannabis dispensary in Marin will increase access because parents will have cannabis in their homes. Hypocrisy at its strongest. The problem is booze, pills, and garbage. Cannabis is good, healthy medicine. We all agree here in Fairfax that keeping big corporations out of Fairfax and allowing local cannabis advocates wishing to source from partners who are also invested and have deep roots in Marin are of best interest to us all. We are fully dedicated to the health and safety of our community. Overall wellness is the #1 goal. Together, we can create a more conscious space for all. We are the heart and soul that is Fairfax. We are the heart, soul, and spirit that is Fairfax. We are the solution. We are one love. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Through the chair, can I ask that the materials we've just been handed from Chelsea be forwarded to the town council by senior planner Neil?
Hi, I am Kathy Taylor. I'm a parent, musician, business owner here in Marin, and a homeowner since the late 80s. Over the past 10 years, I've been actively involved in fundraising in our community for patients of cancer, and recently found out that my ex-husband was diagnosed with cancer as well. So we decided to start a nonprofit to help raise money for the health care of Marin musicians, and opening a legal cannabis business in Fairfax really felt like a great way to fund this project. My partner and I were happy that the town council appeared to want to foster competition. So we began working for months to come up with the reasonable zoning regulations that were possible, and we did everything that our foundation needed to start a medical cannabis business to raise money for the community. Well, to my surprise, although cannabis is now legal, here in Fairfax, it seems we're relitigating old arguments about cannabis and its negative effects in our society. It looks like every time we approach the goal and to open a business, someone moves the post and changes the rules. We honestly did not think that the town ordinances would be applied consistently and fairly to all businesses, but this is not the case. We feel that personal relationships are entering into these proceedings to the purpose of not fostering competition, but to prevent it. So someone selling pot under the guise of CBD-only business is overlooked, or another business that's allowed it to skirt the rules and restrictions altogether. It gives the appearance that this is a rigged game. We're trying to start a business in this town and that we have called home for the past 30 years. And we think creating and enforcing ordinances selectively to favor one business while blocking another is wrong. After months of being delayed by underhanded competitive tactics, we finally obtained the only building possible to open a cannabis dispensary, only to have the rules changed the very night we signed the lease. How is this a coincidence? We don't want to argue or fight with anyone. We're trying to open a legal cannabis business in Fairfax, and we've done everything by the book so far. So the questions I have tonight are these. Why restrict cannabis sales to the point where it's impossible to operate legally in Fairfax while allowing existing businesses to sell it illegally? when we did a residential, and when did a residential house with one basement room used for tutoring become a school? The California Legislative Code has already defined that a private building in which education is primarily conducted in private homes is not defined as a school. That the town now, in the 11th hour, is changing the zoning laws to favor one business is clearly operating the state and not operating under state restrictions, and closing the door to all competition by rezoning the one building available for this type of purpose seems unfair. I don't believe this is what Fairfax residents expect at all. I have sent you all a copy of a recent survey we conducted by a polling company we hired. They are all still getting feedback from residents throughout Fairfax, but when you look at the survey provided, over 75% of the respondents say that they strongly support allowing a cannabis retail business in Fairfax, and only 8% opposed to it. All I'm asking is that, as the Planning Commission, I know that you guys have spent months researching, looking at legal law, looking at what's available in the town of Fairfax, and as Fairfax residents, I think that we deserve a chance for this business. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Again, through the chair, I'd request that any materials sent to us regarding the cannabis issue be forwarded to the town council. This commission made its recommendations already to the town council, and they began deliberating the issue earlier this month. So they're the proper body to raise these issues with at this point, I think. Thanks.
Can I just say one last thing? No? There was just one zoning issue, and the main reason we're here is the building they were trying to exempt us for is actually a primary residence. And I want that really duly noted that I walked over and there's a big sign on the stairs that says tutoring center downstairs. You look in the window, it's a tiny little room, maybe 100 square feet.
Okay, and you can bring that up at the council
I gave
meeting
them a
in
picture.
June.
Thank you.
Okay, I hope this is my first time here, so I hope I'm at the proper
Actually,
place.
sir, if I can interrupt you for a moment, if you could just step back a little bit, the mic works really well
Oh,
now,
okay, all right.
because it rings in my ear.
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay, my name is Kevin. I live here in Fairfax on Scenic Road. And I'm here, I'm just going to read this then. So there is a storm drain diverting water into our property and causing damage. It is causing erosion on our property with each storm, including eroding the land underneath our house. While it flows smoothly along the street above our house, when it goes into and out of the storm drain, it comes out like a fire hose on our property. We have pictures of how much erosion, and also video, has occurred on our property over time due to the flow from the storm drain. We also have pictures of the flow and video through our property during the storms. And I'm just asking about what you can do to help stop this erosion. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Linda,
Yeah, you should, if you want to leave me your name and phone number, I can have the Public Works Manager call you. There's a way to register your issue online at the Public Works Department, and have you done that?
Yes, we've tried that, but we've gotten no response. And we've tried several times.
Have you tried calling the Public Works Manager?
We've sent a follow-up email to Mark Lockerbie asking if
And when did you send it?
we sent it about 3 weeks ago, and we sent the initial request last August.
Okay.
Last August.
Yeah, so these guys don't really have purview over these
Okay.
issues, so so you should call me on Monday,
Okay.
okay?
Great, thank
We'll
you.
talk about it, okay.
can you, sir, can you turn the button off on that mic? Great, thanks. Is there anyone else with comments during open time? I'll close open time. There's no items for consent calendar, so we're going to go to our first item, which is 306 Scenic Road, application 1908.
And I'm just going to, this is a revised resolution for you guys with the corrections.
Okay, so the project would extend an existing retaining wall located adjacent to a permitted one-bedroom accessory dwelling unit currently under construction on the front or southern portion of the property. The retaining wall would be approximately 7 to 9 feet tall and approximately 28.5 feet in length. It would be constructed of steel I-beam and poured concrete and would maintain a 9-foot setback from the western property line. The purpose of the wall is to support and stabilize the uphill cut bank to the west. Proposed excavation and fill would be less than 100 cubic yards, so the project does not require an excavation permit from the Planning Commission. The retaining wall would be stepped with a lower, approximately 3-foot high, 19-foot long retaining wall in front of the taller retaining wall. The purpose of the stepped wall in front of the taller rear wall would be to create a flat pad to place water tanks that would capture rainwater for landscape irrigation. So the project site does not meet the minimum area and width requirements of the RS6 zone, so it requires a conditional use permit from the Planning Commission. And the proposed 7 to 9 feet in height requires a retaining wall height variance because it exceeds 6 feet. So there are numerous retaining walls constructed throughout the town with the purpose of stabilizing hillsides. The purpose of the project is to support the cut bank to the west. It will stabilize the slope on the applicant's property and should reduce potential sloughing damage to the driveway located upslope to the west at 340 Scenic Road. So extending the retaining wall would result in more stable, better development of the premises, which in turn would protect and enhance the community. And regarding the retaining wall height variance, there are several factors unique to the site that favor approving a wall taller than 6 feet. Namely, the hillside is very steep, right where the retaining wall is, and there is an existing scarp that's been there. There previously had been another building in that site that was demolished before the ADU was constructed. And it's also very narrow in that location, so it would be difficult and more expensive to create more impacts to construct several stepped walls that would be at or below 6 feet. And additionally, creation of more walls would take up more space on the site and reduce the area for the rain catchment water tanks. So in addition, the wall would not be visible from the neighboring property at 340 Scenic. The house and the driveway are at an elevation above the wall, and the ADU that's under construction, the accessory dwelling unit that's under construction in the front of the property would block views from people passing by on Scenic. So the staff supports the conditional use permit and variance findings and recommends the application number 1908 be approved by resolution 2019-09 that sets forth the findings and conditions of approval.
Thanks. Does the commission have any questions for staff? No? Oop. Then I'm going to open it up. Is the applicant here? Would you like to make any comments?
Good evening, Chairwoman Swift and Commissioners. The owners are here as well. I'm Ernie Sealander, the architect for the project. I don't want to waste too much of your time. I just want to give you a really brief explanation. First, we're very happy that the staff is supporting our request, and we appreciate all the work they put into the project. What happened was while we were clearing and grubbing for the ADU, we discovered that the cut that was made in the distant past was much steeper than we had imagined or the surveyors had actually charted on the original survey. So we're only asking to construct a wall to retain that steep cut and to restore an angle of repose above it that would protect the driveway above us. We also feel it's a good improvement for the property and for the community at large. So we'd ask you to approve the proposal, the variance, and the conditional use as the staff has supported. If you have any questions at all, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Sealander. I appreciate the information. And so could you just, before I ask my question, repeat what you said? There was some grading that occurred in the past, and there was a deeper than expected cut, and that's what you're trying to correct now? Or I missed that?
Yeah. Basically, we're trying to support a cut that was made without any retaining wall in the distant past. It was covered by vegetation, and then as we started to clear the site to do the work, it became apparent that it was steeper than we'd even imagined.
And so the application is for a variance on the retaining wall height, and we
Yes.
have two retaining walls, one in the back that is upholding the soil that you're talking about, and then a lower one in the front, is that right? So that, and then you're going to put the water retention in between?
That's correct, and also the lower wall is to mitigate the apparent height of the actual wall. We need to retain the cut.
And so if there wasn't right water capture, would you move the proposed wall forward, and therefore you wouldn't need the height of the wall that you're proposing?
That's a good question. Probably not, just because where the cut is, we're actually not even going all the way back to where the cut is now. We're putting the wall in a place where we can fill out to it to create an angle of repose above the wall. Because it not only is the cut there, but then the hillside is very steep above it, where the cut was made.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone from the public wish to speak on this item?
Hi there, Rick Hamer, Fairfax. I don't see an engineer's stamp on the drawing that was submitted. And this retaining wall, with what it's trying to retain from the, just from what I know about this type of thing, I'm just wondering why we don't have an engineer's stamp on the drawing, because it is a tall retaining wall. And actually, this construction of the retaining wall is not textbook. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? If not, I'm going to close public comment and bring it back to the commission for discussion.
I was wondering if we could have the architect answer that question. I assume that there will be an engineered wall at some point. We're just looking at it for the variance, the height variance.
Exactly. This is what I'd call a planning set of drawings. We already had constructed a retaining wall the same height as part of the ADU, and the engineering will essentially be the same. And hopefully, when you approve this, then we will submit all the engineering drawings that go along with it.
Could I speak to that? Would you mind if I speak to that too? So a lot of times you guys will get retaining wall plans that are part of a large project like a new house, and they will be excavating 100 cubic yards, and at that point you'll see a little bit more engineering detail. This wall, there's very little excavation. It was excavated years ago, and so they want to see if you're willing to approve the higher height. If you approve that height, then they will have engineered drawings at the building permit stage. But it's pretty typical for just a straight retaining wall to not be engineered until you grant the height variance. Then they do that before the building permit is issued.
Thank you.
I had asked staff similar questions when I came in this evening, because I don't have an issue with the concept. I understand what you're trying to do. My concern is that the documents we're looking at specify one wall when in fact there's two walls. There's talk of of potential for, let me find that sentence. There's talk of potential for instability due to the steep nature of the underlying geologic conditions present. I do understand oftentimes retaining wall details, foundation details are submitted later with building permit, but I see nothing here about, there is a comment, section 6, is this the resolution? Section 6 of the resolution states that the engineer shall field check completed project to have been installed in conformance with the approved building plans. Those are not plans we have before us to approve. There's nothing about that I can see about the engineer. I mean, usually we'll say the engineer will be on board and approve the plans for the foundation work and the dimensions and the construction of this geologically unsound wall that is retaining an upper parking drive or pad. So I'm just a little flummoxed here as to what to do. I see, I don't have a problem with the concept. I have difficulty approving what's before us precisely.
Well, I would just say I think we can handle it by just adding a condition that the engineered plans are to be submitted.
Approved by the town engineer prior to
I'm looking
issuance of the
at
building
number
permit.
1. I think we can expand number 1 to, to say that a building permit must be applied for, and structural calculations of the retaining wall are to be included, or something to that effect.
So I'm actually in agreement with Norma, because the premise of the staff position is that there is a geologic hazard that is not supported by the material in the packet. And then it does describe how it's supposed to retain or help retain a west cut and to stabilize the slope. I guess I failed to see what the health and safety danger was here that would trigger the need for a retaining wall, first of all, and then secondly, a retaining wall of this height. So I felt like it was not supported by any geologic information in the packet or substantiated information, and so I couldn't support it.
If I understand correctly, we are approving the variance for the height deviation from what is standard, which is, can you repeat to us?
6 feet.
6 feet. So what we are approving, just confirming question, is exceeding the height of a retaining wall. The process for a building permit is going to be at the discretion of the town engineer, and that will require typically structural drawings, details, calculations, and possibly even a geotech report if deemed necessary. So if that is correct, then I'm in support of this, just because I see this as an approval of the height, variation or exceeding the limit on the retaining wall, and just let our town engineers do their job.
Which they would do, whether you had the condition or not, but you can add language if it helps you.
I'm okay with added language. I think I'm okay either way. I'll support it.
So it seems as if some of the commissioners are concerned with the findings that we would be making in the resolution were we to approve it. And going back to page 1 of the resolution, the first finding relates to the grant of special privilege and indicates that there are numerous retaining walls constructed throughout the town with the purpose of stabilizing hillsides and preventing damage to life and property. So I understand Commissioner Rodriguez's concern to be where is the information about the potential damage to life and property that justifies the higher height.
Yeah, I don't know is that's the crux of the application. I think the height is just simply tied into when they evaluate the slope and the cut, it ends up being that height. I think focusing on the stability issues is probably something that's best addressed by the technical people at the time of the building permit. If there is something noted that requires modifications to the design that the Planning Commission is reviewing, then we could bring that back to your commission for reconsideration. I don't anticipate that. This is pretty much a standard retaining wall, and as I said, when you look at the height, it's simply proposed at that height to address the height of the cut and the slope of the hillside. So there's nothing really outstanding here. I mean, potentially anytime you put a cut into a steep slope like that, you're going to have to do a retaining wall.
And then if I might follow up with a question for Commissioner Rodriguez and Commissioner Fregosa, if I take it your concerns about this particular finding are related to the reason we have a height limit in the first place, or is there something else?
Through the chair, my concerns are that I don't have sufficient information here to make a decision, even understanding that obviously it's the engineers and not myself who would make those decisions. There's no rationale here for a higher limit. There's no finding regarding the requirement of a 9-foot retaining wall, and then there's the 2 walls, not one. I don't have a problem with them doing a retaining wall. I just have a problem that I can't make a decision with the information before me. If the appropriate language was included, but I would take a look at it.
And I guess I would go to, what is the purpose of the retaining wall? The purpose of the retaining wall as defined by the package before us is to support 2 water tanks in order to rainwater capture and irrigate landscaping. Because there is no information in front of us to say that there is a geologic hazard, to say there is a geologic hazard does not mean there is a geologic hazard. To say that we are retaining an uphill road does not say there is a problem today. To say that a retaining wall will help something, I don't know. I don't see it, I don't know. So for me, to create a retaining wall for an area for rainwater is not enough for me. And he answered my question, which was, if we shifted the wall, you could lower the height and potentially meet the variance. So if he's saying that, then I'm questioning, well, is there really a geologic nexus between this height, this location, and this wall? So I'm still in agreement with her that I don't see it in the package.
Linda, can you address where the scarf was, or Cara, sorry, where the scarf was originally on the property? Was that where the ADU is now?
Yeah, it was there. There used to be like a carport, that area was cut years ago. I don't know how long ago, but it had been there, when they applied for the accessory dwelling unit to be in that location. It was already existing, the cut had been there for years, but I don't know exactly when the cut was made, because I don't think we have that information in our planning files.
And
Thanks. And can you address the purpose isn't for the rainwater catchments. So, it's the two walls. There's the one higher wall that would be in the same plane as the back of the ADU.
Yeah.
And then a second wall in front for the barrels.
Yeah,
correct?
and so this property is in a landslide hazard zone as identified in the Salem House Rice maps and the Fairfax slope stability maps. And what that means is that if you don't have bedrock for a cut that is that steep, if you have the typical soils and broken up shale that you find throughout Fairfax, it won't be stable unless you lay it back to a 2-to-1 slope. So their only option here, since it's not a bedrock cut, it's been there a long time, it's been stable, but it does have the potential to move if too much water comes down, unless they either lay it back, which would put them probably off their property, right, which they can't do, or to build a wall and then do some minor grading to get the steep area above to that 2-to-1 slope that won't collapse on itself. So that's the purpose of the wall. The second wall is just to kind of break it up. I mean, you might not even call it a wall. It's not going to be retaining hillside. You could even kind of call it a concrete fence that's 4 feet in height. Yeah, but it's creating they're putting it in to break up the visual impact of the 6-foot wall for them. That portion doesn't exceed the height limit, so it doesn't require any kind of a variance. The variance is for the wall that is needed to retain the unretained slope that is not bedrock. Does that make sense?
If I could also expand a little bit further, when you look at the height of the wall, and there's a reason why the town wants to evaluate over-height walls once they get over 6 feet. Visually, they have the potential to be rather obtrusive, and it's also a question of designing the site. Is that a suitable way to stabilize the site? Some people, for example, would create a series of retaining wall to create flat areas simply for the purpose of creating flat areas on a steeply sloped site. This one is a little different because of the existing scarp, that existing cut, the concerns of the neighbors, among others, and because of its lack of visibility and the fact that from staff's evaluation, it seemed like a reasonable approach to address any concerns about slope stability. The visual and design aspects were much less than we often encounter with retaining walls, ones that are, for example, visible from a public right-of-way, which I don't know if this will be at all. So from our standpoint, this was kind of a fairly routine request. Now, in terms of the language of the findings, maybe we could tune that up a little bit to clarify that it's not really about putting in a flat area to have some water tanks. But in terms of the desire for the wall, I mean, the reality is in a situation like this, nobody's looking to put in an additional height, extra height, because it costs more money. So this is just trying to stabilize what they have. The result is some additional flat area, but from staff's standpoint, the ultimate result is satisfactory.
Through the chair, I appreciate the director's comments. I fully understand what you're saying. I just have difficulty being asked to approve a concept of a retaining wall that could go this way, could go that way, the slope could do this or that, but we don't have even a back of the napkin sketch of what that looks like in order for me to make this decision. The plans are, these are not plans, this is a sketch. I'm sorry, that...
Norma, can you look at detail 4 on A1? Because that's showing a cut, a section cut of the retaining wall. and it's a concept, but it does show a section cut. And, I mean, if I understand correctly, the ADU was approved, somebody did a topo, they couldn't really see what was behind the vegetation. They removed they were clearing and, grubbing, and they said, holy cow, there's this huge cut here, what can we do to make it better and not, and prevent landslides in the future? And when they realized it was 7 or 9 feet, they said, hey, why don't we add another little retaining wall to soften it? Right?
This wall is basically matching up with the rear wall of the ADU.
Right.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I think what Director Berto was getting at was what I was asking you guys about, the underlying basis for setting a height limit on the retaining wall if its primary purpose is to prevent large blocks of retaining wall visuals from, screwing with our visuals when we round a corner or whatever. That's one thing. If the question about protecting property, life and property is what's getting, because you don't see underlying geological reports or, drawings that you can rely on other than the common sense of what staff is telling us and the applicant. The water tanks, they are property technically, right? So to the extent that you're preventing the hillside from coming down on the water tanks, that's property. The movement in terms of moving the retaining wall should, the building application plans demonstrate, I wonder how much leeway we can give the building department to address these concerns that you have. I don't want to make a retaining wall a federal case, as it were. I don't want to have these applicants go back and forth with a significant amount of work for something that I perceive of as relatively straightforward if done properly. But I understand that, well, yeah, no, but I'm just trying to ask you because I think it helps. Okay. But do you think there's any way we could rewrite the resolution to address your concerns?
I think with Linda's description, which is really what's happening on the site, which wasn't clear in this staff report, it's really the way that it's described by what you said, that I could be in support of the application. Your point is something else, because the premise of the application was geologic, and it wasn't here. But really, it is that, but it's a much deeper description. And for another application, it might have been visual. I don't know, but this was. So I'm in support of the application based upon what Linda's description was, because it clarified where we were going, which Commissioner Gonzalez-Parker also articulated that wasn't clear until we all talked.
Well, I'm also in support of the application, and one thing of note with this, as staff had said, is that the retaining walls, either one of them won't be visible from the property above or the roadway, either way around. So I'm in support of it. It sounds like we have a vote, and I would like to ask.
Before we vote, so I would suggest that we agree on some minor
That's where I was going.
changes under conditions of approval, paragraph 1 on page 2. Add another sentence that says a building permit must be applied for per the language that Commissioner Caroline suggested earlier.
Try that? I think
Please.
I wrote down what you said. A building permit must be applied for that includes structural calculations and engineered plans that shall be reviewed and approved by the town engineer prior to issuance of the building permit. Does that work?
Sounds good to me.
And then also, if I might, on page 4, under the now therefore be it resolved, the first paragraph says the approval of the conditional use permit and retaining wall height variance. If we could just put the number of the conditional use permit in there, just for future reference, 19-08, that'd be great.
Any other suggested changes for the resolution? If not, can I have a motion?
I'll move to approve, oh no, now I've got the number wrong. Conditional use permit 19-08 and resolution 2019-09. A resolution of the Fairfax Planning Commission approving a conditional use permit and retaining wall height variance for an approximately 7 to 9 foot tall, approximately 28.5 foot long retaining wall at 306 Scenic Road with the changes discussed.
Second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
Abstain.
Motion carries. There is a 10-day appeal process with a $500 fee. Thank you.
Can she abstain, or does she have to vote? She can abstain if she has a conflict in the project, but
Yes,
I vote no.
So, agenda item number 2.
yes, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission. This is a discussion of the work program and priorities for this upcoming fiscal year. This was something that was referenced by commission members at prior meetings, and one that we also undertook last year. Giving some background, last year we did a retreat and we looked at the general plan and the hundreds of programs which were listed in it for planning commission and planning staff responsibility. And out of that detailed review, we came up with a number of priorities, brought those to the town council. The town council, in turn, in August of last year, provided their direction on what they felt those priorities should be, which was then in turn reviewed by the Planning Commission at their meeting. Not surprisingly, when you look at what the commission and the council has been working on in this last year relating to planning items, it has been those priorities, and specifically the cannabis regulations, which there has been a tremendous amount of work on. And I'm probably jinxing it, but I think we're close to winding up on that. The council provided direction at their last meeting, and we're going back to them at their June 5th meeting with draft ordinance on the regulations to reflect that. Other items that were priorities for the council, and I'll get into more detail on this in a minute, was developing objective development standards. Another item has to do with maximum residential size, which the Planning Commission held a number of meetings on, and the council is on its third meeting. They did consider their first reading of an ordinance pertaining to maximum house size. Briefly, they're reducing the maximum. It's called maximum house size, but it's really maximum total structural area on residential and duplex properties. and that would be reduced to 3,500 square feet. So those two major work items have taken, gosh, I think between all of the items that were raised last year and brought forward, we're looking at about 30 separate hearings on those items. In terms of looking at this upcoming year, I had to look at what the council's actual minutes were and also some of the other notes, and I was deep into that, and I apologize for that. But the things that emerged were finishing up on cannabis regulations, finishing up on maximum house size, and looking at objective development and design standards. And this is the objective development standards for housing, and is an interesting topic because it relates to where the state is going with their mandates on housing. And your commission has heard this before, and certainly the council has had a presentation about the changing state laws. But basically, what it amounts to is that in order to review certain types of developments, in order to streamline the review process per the state's direction, we have to come up with standards that are available to a developer and provide that developer with the information sufficient that they can design that development consistent with the town's regulations. In some cases, the state has eliminated any discretionary review, which puts further emphasis on the need to have these development standards, objective development standards, in place prior to an applicant submitting a housing project. One of the things that we did succeed in doing was, and this is sort of the highest priority, lowest hanging fruit, whatever you want to call it, was to look at the planned development district. And again, that was something that, as it existed in our codes and still largely does, involved a multi-phase, very detailed local review process that has served the town well in the past, but ran headlong into the state's desire for an extremely streamlined upfront. These are the requirements that you need to comply with in order to have your project approved. And so what we did was we looked at the challenge that we saw in the planned development district with that process and said, well, here's an adjustment we can make that at a minimum will address maximum density and relate it to slope. We would love to dive further into that at some point. One of the challenges is that, and this is big pushback that many jurisdictions are providing to the state, is that one size fits all state statutes don't work very well in communities that have been largely built out and for the remaining developable sites have any number of constraints. And in Fairfax, you could just look around. We were just discussing slope stability on an already developed parcel. How do you say this is the standards for stabilization or something like that? Pretty obviously that's a conversation and a research of the factors that go into that site, and then deliberation by the appropriate public bodies for that jurisdiction. We're simplifying those things. So one of the things we hope to do in terms of objective development standards is to take advantage of some grant programs that the state is making available. We're going to be taking this up with the council at their June 5th meeting. Once we get direction from the council on applying for those grants, we will take that back to the Planning Commission for more details on what the process would look like to take advantage of funding. It's pretty generic at this point, but I think we will have a lot more details for the Planning Commission's June meeting. So with those recommendations, an additional main topic, and one that staff anticipates will take up the majority of the time going through this next fiscal year and possibly to the fiscal year beyond, is the Morinda Heights subdivision. Because of the 30 public hearings we've had on these other work program priorities, that's been proceeding somewhat slowly. This is going to speed up now. We will be getting into the environmental review process pursuant to the environmental impact report that the applicant will be paying for and the town will be conducting for that proposed 10-lot subdivision. That's going to be a very interactive process involving the commission, the public, consultants, the applicant, and we're still scoping out what the environmental review aspect would consist of because of the very high public interest and high profile of this project, and because there are any number of general plan elements, slope protection, view protection, things of that nature. We need to make sure that somehow those concerns and those issues are addressed up front in the environmental review process. I would point out that with the state's mandates for streamlined review and in some cases ministerial, i.e. the Planning Commission doesn't really get a chance to look at this, we still have the ability via CEQA to conduct a detailed review of potential environmental impacts, and staff intends to take full advantage of that in looking at how this project is or is not consistent with the town's general plan standards, other local regulations, ridgeline view, et cetera. So stay tuned on that. Your commission will be getting involved with that process. So with that, those are the high priorities that staff anticipates going into this next fiscal year, and we welcome commission comments and direction. Thank you.
If I might question, can you give us any report on the closed session from the council meeting about the wall property?
Staff did not participate in that closed session. As you know from the reporting, it was simply that they declined to purchase the easternmost property. There's a 10-acre property that you can see the front of it above St. Rita's School, and it ends up linking to what would be an extension of, was it Ridgeway? Yes. Ridgeway. So that's all I can report as to that.
Through the chair, wasn't there at one time a proposal that a certain amount of that open space would be granted to the town?
As currently proposed, the application that was deemed complete, which only means that now we can start the environmental review process. It's not that any decision has been made on this project, far from it. But the current proposed project has approximately 93 acres of the total of approximately 100 acres in permanent open space. Some of that is proposed for trails. The original iteration included dedication of a certain portion of the 100 acres to public land. They weren't getting a lot of interest from the town because we have seen in other instances where very steep parcels aren't necessarily the most desirable for public parks and things like that.
Thank you. Also, I just wanted to inform staff and the commission that I have a conflict in June and cannot attend. I believe that meeting is June 20th. I would be willing to consider another date, but I cannot make the 20th. So hopefully there's nothing really critical and that there will be a quorum.
Are there questions or comments for staff? Okay. So on this item 2, you're asking for us to provide direction on the draft work program. So most of the things on here, the objective standards, Morinda Heights, cannabis, maximum residential size, were already in progress. You then have potential zoning amendments. So I guess a couple questions that I had is one, you see this as kind of the full-on work program for the next fiscal year. I guess that's a question, because when I reviewed our priorities, thank you, we had things like the downtown historical analysis, establishing an ordinance for the protection, maintenance, and rehabbing and enhancing historical and cultural resources. We had, looking at a new lighting ordinance, possibly with dark skies. We had ridgeline development guidelines and mappings. We had updating the visual resources map. So I guess one of my questions would be, where are those items fitting in your view, in the next fiscal year? What efforts are going on those? And then we'll get into, maybe you can answer that one first before I talk about the zoning amendments.
Thank you, and thank you for your detailed background. I always appreciate the thoroughness that the commission brings to this. Well, one of the main things in regards to the zoning amendments is that with an assistant planner on board, we now have the staff resources that will free us up to start to undertake those. What we have seen with zoning amendments in the past, for example, the maximum house sizes, they can take on a life of their own if we're not careful. In other words, you think that it's a fairly simple thing. I think that was a term somebody used to describe reduction in maximum house size. And the next thing you know, you're 8 meetings and counting and developing ordinances, et cetera. We are looking at a list, and I didn't want to bring this to the commission to include it as an attachment because some of these are so minor. But just to reference back to items that were previously discussed, that your commission and the council seem to be on board with. One of those would be to limit the time period for applications to remain incomplete, and to limit the time period for use permit and design review applications to remain valid. So these are the type of things that we've discussed at a staff level, and that because we consider them more cleanup items, less controversial, but sort of will assist staff, we do intend to bring those back, start bringing those to the commission. In terms of other items, the downtown historical analysis, that would be linked into the objective development standards. Obviously, our downtown has a unique character, and in discussions with Cassidy DeBaker, there are some character-defining features. So what we would anticipate is, as a component of either the partially state grant-funded activities or something that we continue to do as sort of an annex to the objective development standards, would be to incorporate that historical analysis. A concern that Cassidy has had is that she had anticipated kind of rallying a number of volunteers to assist her, and thought that that would produce a little bit more work product than she has been able to generate to date. And so that's very much kind of work in progress. But that's something that staff anticipates pivoting to very quickly, and would be integrated into the objective development standards work that we're proposing to do. Let's see, and then you had...
Let me ask you,
yes.
while you're on that one, so we're now in May, so do you have kind of projections in your mind where you expect to be, let's say, halfway in the fiscal year and by the end of the fiscal year with the historic analysis?
Yes, I believe that in conjunction with some sort of professional assistance that we may obtain, in addition to what Cassidy is going to be producing, that would be a very realistic time frame to be getting into a look at regulations or standards or historic work. So that would be a good estimate of when we would be starting that. Potentially even sooner, particularly in terms of scoping a work program. not necessarily doing the work itself.
Through the chair.
Let me just, on that one. So I guess what I'm looking at is kind of, 6 months, a year, let's say 6 months from now, what, is there a product? I'm, not the starting piece, but what do we envision we would have?
We would have a program for development of the standards. In terms of a product out of that would be the standards, assuming that we get to that process, and that would certainly be the goal. But as we know in Fairfax, it's important to have a lot of education, outreach, consideration, and so at this point, I would be hesitant to say we would have a product that we would be delivering, but we would certainly have a process.
I guess I was looking at with the historical analysis piece of that. So do you envision in 6 months us having have done that review of the buildings and had some kind of analysis back on those buildings is, I guess, what I'm asking.
A typical work product might be a historic context statement, because that's a good starting point where you divide, for example, a town or an area into periods of significance, and look at what we have in the downtown area, and there's actually several of those. So yes, I think that when you're looking at typical historic related products such as that, we would have those or be developing those. To loop back to a comment you also brought up about ridgeline guidelines and mapping. That's been something, we have these wonderful paper maps, but as a product of the 1970s, it's pretty challenging to say where exactly boundaries are and things like that. It's a big map of the town. And so something that's been very much a pending work program is to digitize those maps so that we can apply them to any development project, and in particular Morinda Heights, which does relate to ridgeline areas. So that's something that we've actually been talking to people about getting better equipment. We know that right now our computers and our screens are probably not up to the task of using a geographic information system program such as Marin Maps, which is where we would likely tie in. So that's something that we will be working on internally, and you would probably likely see some products to review, and I would hope that it would help inform the Commission's review of Morinda Heights. And similarly, visual resource map, we would be looking at that as well. So those are areas that it's work in progress, but we are starting that process.
Thank you. Back to the historic assessment. I'm wondering if Cassidy has an informal scope of work, an outline, a list of specific tasks or goals, or any type of a schedule, and what volunteers might be needed for what tasks. We've never seen anything or heard from her at all, and I would appreciate anything informal as that may be.
And I'll follow up on that as well, if I might. I would volunteer to help her, so please let her know to reach out to me. And I think there are many of us here who are interested in that. So if she needs volunteers, 1, 2 commissioners at least.
Thank you for that. What I will try to do is come back for your June meeting with more details on that. And as I said, I would anticipate that we will have a more fleshed out kind of a hybrid of this historic effort combined with objective development standards. We would be starting that. So we'll have more information.
And that would be good, because as Norma said, having like a scope of work or a project plan or something more tangible on this effort would be appreciated. And then I assume that you will be working on the zoning amendments, the list here, and you would be coming back. I have some questions on some of these, but this would probably be a separate agenda item that we can go back to and discuss them on this list that you had here, correct?
Yes, we would be happy to provide an updated list, and we could start to get into the details. Again, what we learned this last year is that the big ticket items take up a lot of bandwidth, and that's why, rather than kind of getting into the really granular analysis of this zoning code amendment and that one, I wanted to sort of keep it as the large ticket items, and then as we get more into, okay, let's look at the zoning amendments, then bring back a more detailed list.
One more thing through the chair. We don't need to discuss it, but I'm just wondering if we're getting back to our zoning map conformity issue. We can talk about that another time.
Can you explain that?
We have a general plan and a zoning map that are not in conformance.
Yeah, there's certain work in progress items. Some of it relates to the housing element, and staff is aware of some of the sinking issues that we're facing.
I'm sorry, can you just explain a little bit more about what's out of sync, or can you educate me, please?
Yes, briefly, the general plan proposed a number of programs involving future zoning code changes, and an example would be the Victory Village site. They were proposing to change that to Planned Development District. And as we know, what the town subsequently did was come up with a senior housing zoning designation for that. So there's a couple of examples of that floating out there where we're trying to figure out the appropriate mechanism to make the change to accommodate the housing or other uses contemplated in the general plan.
There was one other nonconformity issue having to do with the general plan designating new downtown central and commercial zoning areas, and those are not in conformity with the zoning map.
Yes, the town conducted hearings on that, and I wasn't here, but I've heard it was a lively time. And I'm not sure when we're going to be taking that up. Again, it's not necessarily, they talk about general plans being living and breathing documents, so you have a starting point and you start to do the work and you get feedback and you say, okay, we're going to have to make some adjustments into a final outcome. I think the objective development standards may tie into that. And again, much of this is driven by the fact that, hey, if we want to retain local discretionary review and ability to guide development, we've got to do this. So, and this is something that jurisdictions across Marin are facing and have been facing. So, yes, that's another example.
So, you can amend a general plan like up to 4 times a year. Maybe one of the things we should think about doing this fiscal year, next fiscal year, is making recommendations about those conforming changes.
I'm not sure it was the general, I'm not sure the solution is a general plan amendment necessarily, but you're right, we could do it 4 times a year. Moxie.
I don't think general plan's ever been amended during its time frame.
Yeah, we amended the housing element.
Yeah, that would be a typical example. Another thing that the state did a quick pivot on was the, it's not the hazards element, it's the hazards component of, what am I thinking of? Yes, and so when we redo our housing element, they realize that, gosh, we've got these communities that burn to the ground. Maybe we're missing something in terms of hazards. And, dead seriously, this is very much a present issue for Fairfax and any community in Marin.
I guess the question too would be, the general plan references specific like hazard maps that probably haven't been updated as well.
Yeah, what's interesting, I was at a planning directors meeting this week, and apparently CAL FIRE is working on land use planning. So in conjunction with some of the state statutes and a recognition by the fire professionals that it's not simply, make sure you cut down your brush or things like that, that they need to be doing a little deeper dive into how and where development occurs. And so that's something where we may be seeing conversations. Now, the counterpoint to that is that we have a fire department. We have professionals in Marin who are working on fire safety. We have fire-wise neighborhoods, which incidentally is another town council priority for this upcoming fiscal year. And Fairfax has been, if I may say so, very diligent in those efforts. But Fire Safe Marin and other efforts by various entities. We just had a conversation with our fire inspector, and the county has somebody who's deeply involved with that as well. So, wait and see how those planning processes may involve the town in your commission.
Any other comments?
I think it would be really great if we could, at some point, get to an agreement on what we all think we should be focusing on and really send a memo to the council to say this is what we think we want to be focusing on this next period of time, so that they kind of understand what's our emphasis, how does that relate to staffing, and in my mind, the number one priority would be the staff recommended zoning amendments. 2 would be the cultural resource, historic preservation, or maybe the ridgeline, I'm not sure, but then 3 would be the ridgeline and the visual mapping. And then the general plan thing, maybe that could be thrown in with the objective standards, which Ben was saying would be thrown into cultural resources. That's a big banana there, so. A lot of great stuff happening there.
Anything else? Thank you, Ben. Next item, minutes. The minutes from the April 11th meeting. Does anyone have any corrections?
I have a question. So I was looking at the cannabis recommendation, and I don't know if this wasn't completed. I don't see a vote for a recommendation. Did I miss it?
Motion to adopt resolution, page 6, about the 4th item up.
Page 6. Oh, let me see.
You're just saying that you didn't see the individual vote?
Yeah, that's actually, yeah, I see it now. Okay. I was looking at one of my comments when I started to express concerns, and it doesn't really capture what I said, but I can't remember what I said versus what I was thinking, so I'd like to go back and look at the tape, the video. Is it possible to just send you an email with?
We do have videotapes up right now.
Do you want to hold that off until the next
That's what I'm
meeting?
saying. I'd like to just hold it off.
Yeah.
And then I just want to make sure I go on the record explaining what my concerns were. and it's not
Okay,
detailed here.
yeah, so, exactly.
Okay. I guess that's okay.
So do you want to do a motion to continue the
Yes,
minute?
I'll make a motion to continue approval.
Before you do that, just a little correction on, for when you bring it back, on page 8. You've got Caroline and Newton eyeing, but we've also got us absent.
Oh, here it is.
Okay, you want to
Go
make
ahead,
that
Esther.
motion again?
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to continue approval of the minutes for the April 11th, 2019 meeting until the next Planning Commission meeting.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Abstain.
I should abstain also because I wasn't.
You weren't here.
I weren't there. I wasn't
You
there.
weren't there. Okay. So 2 abstentions on that. Also, on the March 21st minutes, we asked to bring those back. So if you could bring those back as well at the next meeting, and then if there's, and for commissioners, that video's up on the website, so we can look at that too for clarification of our comments. So if you could bring both of those back, that'd be great. Planning Director's report.
Excuse me. Commissioner Rodriguez and the planning director had the pleasure of attending at least a couple of the sessions of the National Planning Conference that was held in San Francisco. And, you know, it's really great to see leading edge solutions and how quickly the conversations about all things planning develop. So if you're interested in seeing some of the sessions, I think I could look into seeing what information is available for overall commission review. And beyond that, I don't have much unless you have questions.
Yeah, if there's information online or for the conference, that'd be, or whatever you can provide us would be great. Thanks. Commissioner comments?
I do have a comment. I was talking to the merchants for the CBD store, and they pointed out how dangerous that crosswalk is. I guess they have a direct view. And I'm just wondering, I don't know how to address it or to whom to address it, but is there a way to get the little blinking lights that we have on Center on that intersection? Or, yeah, that crosswalk? Because we used to have little flags and, you know, that didn't really work and they're not there anymore.
Yeah, Fairfax has been pretty good about those blinking lights. I'm not
Yeah.
sure what the criteria for doing those. I know I sprint across that intersection all the time. And
Yeah.
yeah, you've really got to look and then move lively. So I'll check with the town manager and report back.
Okay, thank you.
Any other commissioner comments?
I just, 2 things. I was also going to mention that I went to the National APA Conference, and there were 2 sessions in particular that I attended that I thought were very relevant, and one of them had to do with the sharing economy, which is the Airbnb home regulation topic. And I thought it was really interesting because there was a particular speaker who got up who'd been doing some analysis across the United States and had her conclusions, and I don't know what her resources were that rental growth rates were significantly increasing as a result of Airbnb units, and that the revenue that folks can get can be upwards of $20,000 a year, but that the lost TOT tax, and she was quantifying it, but one of the ways that she was looking at it was saying that in the county, West Marin, their TOT taxes is 14%. So 14% of that $20,000 can equal up to quite a lot of money. So it was just a really interesting session. The other one that I attended had to do with impact fees and the different types of impact fees that cities look at. And it was really fascinating because this is really a revenue generating opportunity for cities. And one particular resource that they were looking at was the JAPA book, which is the National Planning Association journal. That's on impact fees, but also a resource on impactfee.com/resources/surveys. And there was a lot of spreadsheets with national examples of what fees people are getting, and then breakdowns from those fees and how much they're earning as a result. I mean, California is a bit of an anomaly because we have the nexus requirement and other states don't, but still it was still a really good linkage fee presentation. And the only other thing is that I came across some new objective standards that the city of Lafayette presented to their city council on Monday night. And so I did give it to Ben, and I'm trying to keep my eye out for what cities are doing this so that staff can pick and pull for whatever works for them locally. But this particular example I think was interesting because they also have hillsides and they have a downtown, but they chose initially to focus their objective standards just on downtown so as not to address some of the topics that we were discussing this evening, health and safety issues. And they broke it down into 4 different sections. The applicant had to get 25 points out of 3 of the 4 categories. And the categories were open space, creeks and landscaping, parking and circulation, height and scale. And then for each subcategory, they had points that they had prioritized. In other words, if you put up a bicycle rack amenity, that was 1 point. But if you provided access to the public right-of-way, that was 8 points or something like that. So you can see how they were incentivizing projects to do certain design activities in order to get to a faster approval. And I thought it was a pretty good example. It was done by an architect, and it was good. So I just wanted to let you know that they're all starting to come out now, because I think the city of San Jose's just came out as well.
Thank you. I had one comment or one question. There was a question sent to staff on 7 Lima. And I was wondering if you had a chance to take a look at that. We had approved.
Is this about the riprap?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have looked at, well, Ben, we're waiting for our Public Works Department to.
Yes, we're aware of the riprap. There's, various reasons why people do that, stabilize the drainage swale. And so what we're going to do is talk to our Public Works people and find out to what extent is that consistent with what we normally like to see in our drainage ditches.
And I don't know, because I know that project came before us. Okay, so that was one of the questions I had, whether that was addressed. I looked at it today, and I know they've got, they put a sidewalk in for a portion of it going, I guess, to try and connect up to the path that would go up to the library, because the sidewalk really doesn't go anywhere. Other than it is for that one piece. So then perhaps for the next meeting, you can bring back the comments on that. Yeah, thanks. Okay, so,
One other thing, and I apologize, but Kara has been working on a conflict of interest map, and I believe you have those? Okay. We're trying to get the town attorney, as is their want, the state has once again adjusted the conflict of interest laws pertaining to public officials and staff, et cetera. And whereas previously it was kind of a 500-foot limit, and beyond that there was no provisions. Now there's some interesting wrinkles pertaining to 500 feet and 1,000 feet, that distance for certain projects. And so what we've done is Kara's put together a really nice series of, I guess, radiuses from your commissioners' residences, along with an address list. So if we are looking at future projects, you would be able to tell at a glance whether or not you're within that 500 feet where there's potentially a conflict, or that 500 to 1,000 feet where there's specific criteria. And I'm trying to get the attorneys here to either write a memo or appear before your commission, because, you know, it's a legalese stuff, and I'm not, of course, qualified to provide legal advice, but at the same time, as we get into projects, it would probably be important to understand what the latest state regulations are and keep your commissioners out of any potential trouble. So look for that coming up at a meeting soon.
Thank you. I think that's it. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Meeting's over. Thank you.